This morning, the special session. If Texas House Democrats are confronted again by GOP-supported voting restrictions, will they and can they deploy the nuclear option to kill it? We'll talk with State Representative Nicole Collier. Plus, a different look at this week's special session. Republican strategist Matt Mackowiak expecting a potential showdown inside and outside the Capitol. Also, STAR test results are in, and they show significant pandemic learning loss. So what does that mean for the next school year? And President Biden's goal to have 70% of the nation vaccinated by today comes up short. The politics and the health concerns as vaccine hesitancy slows progress. Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins weighs in.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning and happy Independence Day to all of our viewers across the state. I'm Jason Wheeler, filling in for Jason Whiteley this week. Let's begin this week with the top political headlines across Texas. Former President Trump says building a controversial state-funded border wall won't be that easy. He joined Governor Abbott in the Rio Grande Valley this week to tour the border. They claim President Biden isn't doing enough to stop the surge of migrants. While Mr. Trump encouraged Abbott to build his own border wall, he did acknowledge his own efforts to do that were slowed by legal challenges, and that he was in office for 2.5 years before border wall construction could even begin. First Lady Jill Biden was also in Texas. She visited Dallas and Houston to encourage Texans to get the COVID-19 vaccine. In Texas, nearly 50% of people over the age of 12 are now fully vaccinated, but experts are worried about the millions of Texans who are still unvaccinated, especially with that new Delta variant threatening to become the dominant strain in Texas. And a U.S. Supreme Court ruling could make it harder for Texas Democrats to challenge potential voter restriction laws being pushed by Republican lawmakers. In a 6-3 vote, justices upheld some of Arizona's voting rights restrictions. Challengers had argued that the measures disproportionately affected Black, Hispanic, and Native American voters. The Texas GOP's so-called voter integrity bill is expected to be reintroduced in next week's special session. Democrats claim that bill suppresses the minority vote. In fact, this issue recently led Democrats to walk out of the state capitol, and by doing so, they were able to kill that bill on the last day of the regular session. There's been a lot of speculation about what Democrats would do to stop those same measures from going forward in a special session. To talk more about this, we have State Representative Nicole Collier joining us this morning. Representative Collier is a Democrat from Fort Worth. She represents parts of Tarrant County. And joining us now is Representative Collier from Fort Worth. So we know, though, that this election bill has been talked about a lot, and that was a big focus toward the end of the regular legislative session. Have Democrats been huddling about this? I know you can't, tell us everything that you hear in internal meetings, but have Democrats been huddling about this and talking about the possibility that maybe they would employ that tactic of walking out again, if necessary, to prevent something from going forward in a special session?
Well, of course, we want to be able to utilize all the tools in our toolbox and follow the procedural rules in terms of being able to oppose any type of harmful legislation. But we don't even know what that legislation looks like. So I don't believe it's appropriate at this time to say walk out now. I think that we need to see what is filed and how the proceedings go, and then make that call as to whether it's the nuclear option, which is your last resort option of walking out. And pretty much, the governor could call about 17 special sessions. They last 30 days, and he could call us back every month, technically, until he gets what he wants. So, we have to make sure that we're looking at the whole picture before making a decision to walk out.
There's been some talk that maybe Republicans might be a little bit more inclined to make some deals in this special session with some of these other items to sort of create a nice working relationship, if you will, so that Democrats can't delay redistricting as we head into the primaries next year. Do you think that there is a possibility that maybe we go into this special session and maybe some, pretty tough issues are on the agenda here, and that maybe we find some level of bipartisanship?
Look, anything's possible. I mean, I'm glad to hear that you're hearing that there's concern, there's a consensus or a desire to work together. That's always what we would envision with our Texas legislature, is being able to work and hash out our differences to have the best legislation for all Texans. But sometimes that just doesn't happen. And we realize that. But of course, with redistricting, we already knew that the governor was going to call us back for that when the census numbers come out later this fall. So we know that that's going to be on the call eventually. Whether that's going to be the pinpoint where that's going to cause Republicans and Democrats to work together, I don't know. Again, we have 67 Democrats in the Texas legislature. It's not enough to carry anything on its own. They have the votes to pass just about most of the legislation that they want.
Are there some things, a couple of things that pop to your mind that we should desperately attempt to take up in a special session now that we're, in this season?
Oh, well, that's a loaded question. Of course, there's so many things that we could take up. The reason why, in the legislature, we cannot take up legislation for the first 60 days. We can't pass any bills, and that's to give cooler heads to prevail. But that also limits the ability of us to pass solid legislation. I'd really like to see us shore up our infrastructure and provide additional guidance and legislation surrounding, our infrastructure. When we had that Winter Storm Uri, there's still more that we can do. Of course, with education, there's always more that we can do. But it just seems like a lot of the, far right issues are making it back and to the forefront. When you're talking about the governor saying that he's going to bring back critical race theory, or a bill to deal with elections, when our former Secretary of State said our elections were safe, secure, and successful.
Yep, and we'll see what gets done in this week ahead as we begin this special session, maybe the first of who knows how many of these. Representative Collier of Fort Worth, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Well, educators knew that students would experience some learning loss during the pandemic, but Monday STAR test results revealed just how much. The Texas Education Agency says there was learning loss in almost every subject and grade, with the steepest drop-off coming in math, and students who did most of their learning remotely suffered the most significant declines. So how do state leaders and educators plan to get students back on track again? Ross Ramsey is the co-founder and executive editor of the Texas Tribune. Good morning, Ross.
Hi, Jason. How are you?
Doing well today. So this dramatic drop in standardized test scores is pretty alarming as students return from remote pandemic education. Where do we head from here?
Well, we've got to catch them up somehow. This was not completely unexpected. Students slide a little bit every summer between the end of the spring and the beginning of fall. But the slide this time was over a year. People were in remote learning in most cases, and it shows in the scores. They've got some federal money to help them catch up if they can figure out the curriculum to catch this cohort of students up so that they're not behind for years and years.
We'll see if that extra money does the trick. Ross, before we finish this here, let's talk about that special session that starts on Thursday. What are you looking for?
Well, the first thing is the voting bill that failed at the end of the regular session. That's ostensibly the reason the governor's called them back. He also vetoed all the funding for the legislature, so they're going to have to reinstate that before September 1st, or the legislative agencies will shut down. I expect as this goes on and the governor gets what he wants, or something like what he wants, he might add some other things to the call, and there's a long line out of his office of people asking to save their pet piece of legislation. It's
going to be an interesting summer. Ross Ramsey with the Texas Tribune. Stick around. We'll see you again in the Reporters Roundtable in just a bit. Still to come here, potential voting restriction legislation in Texas. There is strong disagreement between Republicans and Democrats. So should we expect that to create an intense, divisive special session? GOP consultant Matt Mackowiak is weighing in on that. And how can Texas get to that goal of vaccinating 70% of its population? Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins is with us when we come back. You are watching Inside Texas Politics. As we continue discussing the special session now, we go back to Austin to talk to Matt Mackowiak, a Republican consultant and the president of Potomac Strategy Group. He is familiar with special sessions and how they work and what the issues are this time around. What do we expect out of this sort of mini session?
Yeah, so special sessions are subject to the call of the governor. No one else can call them. They last only 30 days, and the issues that can be considered are entirely up to the governor. And so in this case, he's, I think, signaled that he's going to put at least 4 issues on the call. He's going to put this issue of social media companies and deplatforming individuals. He's putting bail reform on there. He's putting the legislative budget on there so that the staff and the members can get paid. And then finally, he's putting election integrity on there. It wouldn't surprise me if he had something related to border security and border security funding on there as well. Look, these are intense periods. Instead of 140 days, you have 30 days. The election integrity issue has a lot of hot opinions on both sides. It's going to be very divisive, probably. The other issues, I think there probably will be pretty good agreement. But, you know, the question is whether they can get all the work done, and whether there's a need for a second special session, which no one wants.
We already know that there's likely to be one later this year to deal with redistricting. And now the lieutenant governor has come out and said, hey, we ought to have a special session to deal with the electric grid here in Texas, which, going into the regular session, that was supposed to be the great big item. That was supposed to be the thing that was definitely going to get done after what happened in February. And then here we started the month of June, and we were all told to, hey, ease up on the electricity because we don't know if we're going to have enough. Do you think we see a special session just for that? And should we?
Great question. It feels to me like the lieutenant governor is right about this, and I don't know where the governor is on this. He said a couple of weeks ago that he believes that they've done everything they need to do related to the electric grid. I don't know whether he still believes that after the last rainstorm in Austin. I know we had 30,000 people lose power for 3 weeks, which is ridiculous. That was just from a rainstorm. I think the lieutenant governor is trying to get ahead of blackouts and brownouts, which could come this summer. And I think he recognizes that we haven't gone far enough. Whether the governor believes that is the only thing that matters, because he's the only one that can decide what goes on the special session call.
Is it thornier, though, in the sense when you take something up in a special session that you do focus the attention of the voting public who might actually tend to pay attention a little bit more than they do when there's the flood of bills during the regular legislative session?
Yes, you raise the stakes on any given issue because more people are paying attention. And you're probably going to have supporters and opponents really more mobilized, more engaged, working harder because they're able to do it. During the legislative session, 140 days, you have thousands of bills filed. I think they passed something like 1,200 this year. That was far less than they normally pass, right? So it's really hard to focus the attention of the public on any one issue. Unless it really becomes a national issue, it's very hard to do that. In this case, you're going to have a major national debate in Texas on election integrity from July 8th to August 8th or whenever it gets done. It is going to be a circus, and I think Texans should be aware of that. And I wouldn't rely on rhetoric. I'd look at the actual bill, what it actually does, whether there was a problem at all. Everyone can come to their own conclusion, but it's important that Texans understand what this law does and what it doesn't do.
Mm-hmm. And more of the circus that you're talking about could be going on just outside of the Capitol rather than necessarily under the dome.
Yeah, that's right. You're going to have massive protests. You're going to have celebrities coming in. You're going to have all kinds of things, pressure campaigns, probably some threats. That's how high the stakes are. And I think Democrats see this bill as affecting future elections. I don't think Republicans see it that way. I really don't.
Hey, thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, Texas didn't get very close to President Biden's challenge to have 70% of the population vaccinated by today. So the question now is, where do we go from here with the vaccination rate and with the politics that surround it? Let's put those questions to our next guest, Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins. Judge Jenkins is a Democrat and represents all of Dallas County. Judge, thanks for being with us.
Hey, great to be with you.
So let's talk about the deadline that's coming up. And I guess we shouldn't call it a deadline. We should call it a goal. July 4th, President Biden had set that goal for 70% of the population to be vaccinated. We're, of course, going to miss that goal nationwide and certainly here in Texas, where the rates are somewhere in the high 50s. What is your thinking on this? How are we going to get that number over the hump, now that we're this far into the process?
Well, the evidence is in now. The vaccine is safe, it's effective, it's the right choice for everyone. This is the people that haven't been vaccinated yet. It's similar to when we had the seat belts get into cars. People said, I don't want to wear this. I might be trapped in my car if I have a wreck. But over time, people figured out that the safe thing to do is to wear that seatbelt. And now, if you don't wear your seatbelt, it's not because you think it's safer not to. It's because you just choose not to wear your seatbelt.
So we know that months ago, the president came out and put it all on the line and laid out this goal out there of getting enough shots out there and trying to get to that 70% figure. They did get the shots out there. It's just that there's not as much uptake now. Do you think that there's going to be a political blame game that goes on in the months ahead, on both sides?
Well, I hope not. In the states that required, for instance, vaccine cards for you to take your mask off in the buildings, or required vaccination to do certain things, they're well above the 70%. In the states where we haven't done that, they're well behind. The important thing right now, though, is not to look to others, but to look at for each person to make that decision to get vaccinated. And if you've already been vaccinated, then I think it's very important that you try to encourage your loved ones to get vaccinated.
You touched on some of the mandates and restrictions there just briefly, and I want to close with that. As we head into the fall, there's been a lot of concern that these new variants that spread very easily could become a real problem, especially in places like Texas that have a lower vaccination rate. You are a local official. You've been limited as to what you can do as far as mandates go. Are you worried about what you might see in the fall and what you might and might not be able to do to stop it?
I'm very worried about what we may see, because here's what we know about this virus and every virus. Viruses constantly look for another host, and they try to mutate so they become deadlier and more contagious. That's what this virus is doing. And if we allow it enough time, it will eventually mutate out of the protections of our current vaccines. It's important to not just the individuals, but to everyone, that they get vaccinated as soon as possible. Let's be independent from COVID. So many people have suffered and sacrificed to make America a great country. Do your part, take the shot, do your part to help this country get past the COVID pandemic that has claimed over 600,000 lives.
Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins, thanks for being with us, and happy Independence Day to you, by the way.
Happy Independence Day to you and everyone.
As we touched on earlier, former President Trump visited Texas this week. So what are we to make of the images of him with Governor Abbott, and especially with Attorney General Ken Paxton? We're going to talk about that on our roundtable coming up next.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Okay, it is time for our Reporters Roundtable today, where we put the headlines into perspective each week. Back with us, Ross Ramsey from the Texas Tribune, and as we have each week, Bud Kennedy from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and Bernadine Steptoe, the political producer at WFAA in Dallas. Ross, let's start off with this. The former President Trump's visit to the Valley earlier this week with Governor Abbott, talking about a wall down there, and they seemed really chummy. It hasn't always been that way between these two, has it? And what's changed?
It hasn't, but the Texas Republican primaries have gotten much more competitive, and the conservative end of the pool is much more important. Legislature had a much more conservative session this time, largely led by the governor. He's stressed some national issues that are of importance to the former president and to those conservative voters I'm talking about, not the least of which is the Build the Wall program that was a signature of Trump's and is now a signature of Abbott's. I think we're going to see more of this as we get closer to 2022 elections, where the governor's back on the ballot.
So, Bud, 2022 looming large with this event.
And 2024 maybe, but this was such a stunning scene. We saw Abbott, who has this judicial temperament, sitting next to Trump, who was unorthodox, making off-the-cuff remarks about IQ tests and things like that. Abbott kind of chuckled nervously at some point. But Abbott needs Trump's help to win the governorship, and then also Abbott needs Trump to stay out of the presidential race in case Abbott thinks he might have a chance in 2024. Trump's interested too, in case he comes back and runs in 2024. He could get tips from Greg Abbott on how to veto the entire U.S. Congress.
And Bernadine, this looked very much like a campaign rally there down in the Valley.
And it probably was considered one. But one thing about Governor Abbott, he is a very smart and seasoned politician. And he understands that at this point, former President Trump is a very popular Republican. Matter of fact, he's one of the most popular in the nation. So it would benefit both, but it would definitely benefit Abbott to cozy up to him.
Let's talk about somebody else who was front and center, and that's Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, who was right there in the thick of it as well, Ross. And we did not see notable names like George P. Bush and Eva Guzman, both Republicans, of course, trying to get Ken Paxton's job in 2022. Did this look like an endorsement to you?
Not quite yet. You know, the people in the Attorney General's race are hoping for and waiting for the president to make a choice in this. And in fact, the former president said he would make a choice in this pretty soon. Paxton and Trump have been pretty close. Paxton was one of the speakers at the Trump event that preceded the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. And I think it would be a surprise if Paxton's not the one who ultimately gets this endorsement. But George P. Bush has played for it, and I would expect Eva Guzman is probably working on it.
How about you, Bud? Do you think there's any significance to Paxton being there front and center?
Yeah, Ross, I don't know. I mean, Trump is fond of Paxton, but also Trump really doesn't like losers. And Paxton tried and failed to get the election overturned. I think that Trump may like him, but I don't know if he's going to wind up endorsing him.
Bernadine, do these other two Paxton challengers, should they be concerned here?
I don't think that they should be concerned. But one thing that I would have wondered is if Paxton had not been there. He is Attorney General. He's the incumbent. And those state leaders were briefing the former president, so he should have been there. But we'll see how former President Trump endorses. I think that if he probably will endorse Paxton, but he's making them wait a long time.
All right, that is all of our time. Thank you both. Thank you all very much, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next week.